Hello, everyone. All right, this is the utility contractor discussion. These nice gentlemen up here are part of the Solar Power World Top Solar Contractors list. It's an annual list that we put out, and so we thought we would kind of celebrate their standing and have some discussions about utility scale work. So with me today, we have Mathew Ricci. He is head of EPC at Arraycon. And Nathan Vogel, he is Vice President of Strategic Research for Inovateus Solar. David Bryan is not with us today, but I thought maybe we could start with, you guys could briefly talk about your company, maybe some of the projects you're working on, just kind of give a scope of the work that you're doing.
Mathew Ricci with Arraycon. We are a primary EPC installer of single-axis tracker systems throughout the United States, California, all the way through to Virginia. We install systems anywhere sizing from 1 megawatts to about 400 megawatts in size. So it just depends on what that is. Part of our core competence is installing piers, posts, modules, racking. We install Next Tracker systems, Arraytech systems, ATI systems, and other various single fixed systems as well. Headquartered in Sacramento, California. Been essentially founded about 7 years ago. The CEO of our organization is Rick Levezzo, and he is actually one of the 5 founders of SunEdison, for which I come from too as well. SunEdison way back in the day when it was founded, Jiggershaw and Brian Robertson and all those folks. So been in the industry 17 years, and it's been exciting, and it's never stopped. The solar coaster keeps on going.
Hi, I'm Nathan Vogel. I work with Inovateus Solar. We're a Midwestern company. We're in South Bend, Indiana. We're about 90 miles outside of Chicago, for those that don't know. We are a company, we've been around for about 12 years now. We started as a development company and then kind of split off solar. We were doing distribution a long time ago. And then in 2008, we split off and started doing more EPC and development work. And that's when we started working with utilities. Our first project was with Dayton Power and Light. It's a utility in southern Ohio. And Inovateus Solar, we've got roughly 45 employees. We're an EPC and developer, and we still have a small part of our company is still distribution to residential installers and small commercial installers throughout the Midwest. Some of the projects that we've recently worked on in the Midwest with a lot of the utilities are, we just finished up a 60 megawatt project with DTE out of Michigan. The Midwest has kind of been slower than the East and West Coast in terms of utilities and the system sizes that they've been doing. So the last 3 years or so, we've seen a lot of pilot projects. So a lot of utilities that want to get into solar are doing, roughly 10 megawatt projects, 5 to 10 megawatt projects, just to kind of feel it out. And so we've done a lot of projects within Indiana with like Duke Energy. We did their first, I&M, which is AEP's their parent company, a lot of municipalities and co-ops, and then we work with a lot of utilities throughout Michigan also.
Can everybody hear us okay, or do we need to speak louder? Louder? Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay. One of our first major questions, it's been talked about a lot at the show. How has the potential panel tariff affected your work for the rest of this year? Are you guys, have any projects been delayed? Anything like that?
We haven't really had a delay in projects. The trade case, of course, is a concern for us. We do expect a possible lull, of course, in the first 2 quarters of next year. Right now, the majority of our projects have been undergoing now for about, and since the first quarter, and remember, we're doing projects the size of, like in Virginia, where we've started probably about 2-3 months ago, that are going to go through into next year. But when it comes to EPC projects that we're building and doing full EPC on, there is a concern. Modules and module sales obviously are anticipated to go up, and our module suppliers at the same time are trying to curtail that or mitigate their risk, if you will. But we are finding that some of our suppliers are finding ways to curtail that risk through the manufacturing process, whether it be cells being procured on an individual basis in their raw component, if you will, and then depending on the trade case agreement and where it goes, the cells could be shipped to a different manufacturing location, Mexico, United States, Canada, or something to that effect, to sort of reduce that, or even just keep them in China, manufacture it there, and mitigate that cost. But regardless, there is a lot of concern.
For us, I would say it's definitely affecting us, and we did have a utility that we had an agreement with, a contract with, that when the tariff discussion first came out, that they originally were thinking about purchasing panels early, but they decided to kind of back off and just hold off on the project until the whole tariff thing runs out, to see where it ends up and to see if they want to continue to move forward or not. We are seeing creative ways, to make panels available, but the pricing has gone up throughout the industry, and availability has been difficult on certain projects.
How easy or difficult is it to use American-made products for these larger projects that you're doing?
Sure. Well, we actually used American-made product on the 60 megawatt DTE project that we did. The manufacturer will go unnamed, but we love using American-made products. We think it's great, and when we can do it, we push. A lot of customers request it. A lot of utilities want to use American-made products, and so if they're available and pricing is competitive, we'd love to use them on any projects that we can.
Yeah, and to go further with what you said, available, that's one of our key issues, is availability. On these large-scale projects, a lot of these American-made manufacturers can't meet the demand. They can't meet the velocity. They can't meet the size requirements that we need to build our projects throughout the United States. So that certainly is a concern. Yes, price is a concern. And then the other concern, too, of course, being a Tier 1 manufacturer, the other concern, too, is the quality, its ability and capability to produce, throughout the longevity of the project. So, but we do strive to use American-made products, and as just was said earlier, we have utilities that want U.S. content. They want a percentage of U.S. content, and sometimes we can get away with a percentage of the manufacturing process being a U.S. content, but it's not necessarily a preference from our perspective, but yeah, obviously desired. We want to encourage American jobs.
So what are your biggest challenges right now for your business within utility scale? I know I talk to a lot of residential contractors, and a lot of them always talk about permitting, things like that. Are you seeing the same problems, or maybe what are the biggest problems with utility scale projects?
Permitting? No, not really. Municipalities sometimes you have to educate a municipality when it comes to permitting, especially a large-scale utility project. Typically, these municipalities are new, or they are mature in understanding solar, but they're not mature in understanding large-scale solar. And you can't charge 2% permitting fee on a 200 megawatt job. You just can't. So what you do is you sit down with that local, county supervisor or their manager, their inspection group manager, and you say, look, what's the salary for a guy for a year? What's it cost? What's your true cost to inspect this job? Now let's talk about that number, and what do you need to sustain your department reasonably, and then you can get your costs down. And I have those conversations just about every project. I had a project here in Vegas, and they came in at $100,000 on a permit fee, and I was like, well, this project's only 4 months long. Who makes that much money in 4 months? Can you help us out here? So they're reasonable. You just have to work with them. As far as other challenges, our biggest challenge for us on large scale, in the large utility scale industry sector, is people. It's good people, and it's retaining good people. And a little word I talk about is labor sustainability. We hire anywhere from 100 to 600, or have 100 to 600 employees on our payroll at any one time. We invest in those workers by training them to build to very high velocities on projects. And what we find, of course, is in the nature of construction is you're always working yourself out of a job. When it's done, the people go home. The problem is when they go home, we lose them, and we lose that training, and we lose that capability. And in a perfect world, we would love to have another project right after that, and then just ship them over and have them do that, but it doesn't happen. So it would be great if our industry could have a workforce or organizations that have workforces, and we have some that we partner with, but on these larger projects, that investment's lost, and then of course you got to retrain again. Your velocities are low and ramp up rates and all that. So that's really our biggest issue.
Yeah, for us, currently manufacturing commitments is an issue, and some of that has to do with the tariff and for whatever other reasons out there. But timelines and commitments, just meeting those with the utilities is always really important. And then on the labor side also, just educating, the workforce, whether it's on the mechanical or the electrical side. For us being in the Midwest, there a lot of the contractors are familiar with solar, or they're getting more familiar with solar, but a lot of them haven't necessarily worked with solar. So we're working with a lot of first-time contractors, and so just educating them on the whole process and kind of helping streamline the process so that it becomes more routine and you can kind of go through the project quicker.
Okay, excellent. Let's talk about storage. Are you finding more demands for energy storage on some of these large-scale projects?
Yeah, I would say we're seeing storage and a lot more, RFPs coming out from utilities. For the most part, in the Midwest, the utilities that are doing storage or putting them in their RFPs, they're also putting an option, either you can bid with just solar or solar with storage. And for the most part, they're just kind of dabbling around, trying to learn more about it. They want smaller size storage systems just to learn, educate their workforce internally, and just kind of see how it plays out. But we are seeing a lot more interest. I mean, almost every utility we talk to has a question about storage. They want to know how it's going to interact with the system, and they see it, I think, as part of the future.
In our space, as far as storage is concerned, am I hearing the feedback, or it's kind of? Do I need to bring it closer, or what do you want me to do? Hello, like that. Over the course of this year, we've probably bid about 2 RFPs that had a requirement for storage. We are seeing an increase in concern and buildup in the industry, as you will. Stepping back here, when it comes to storage, what was it, 3 years ago, I think the biggest issue in storage was bankability, financeability, understanding how to finance it. They didn't, the financial risk was really high, and I think part of that still exists today when it comes to storage. But I think that they're better educated. But if we think back when it comes to storage, we've been storing energy in batteries for years. Think about UPS units that are in computer centers that have batteries in them. This is not new. It's new because you're putting storage now onto a grid instead of just into a computer server or a mainframe computer room, if you will. But the storage is going to increase, I think, as the customers become more educated and understand the financial part of it, but bringing it forward. We're not seeing very much, once again, but we have to educate our customers better to understand how it works and how it benefits the customer.
Now, I know, Nathan, you said that since Inovateus Solar works in the Midwest, you don't see a lot of California issues, but I wanted to ask about, are you guys seeing inverters help support more grid functionality? I know in California they have the Rule 21 interconnection requirement that allow inverters to be more interactive with the grid. Is that coming into the Midwest at all? Are you seeing more inverters interacting?
Yeah, and we're seeing more requests from utilities that they want inverters that interact with the grid, and they want to be able to communicate with them. We haven't seen it as a requirement yet, like you see in California, but I don't think it's far away. I think it's going to spread through other states, and you're going to see it kind of all across the board throughout the U.S. Maybe not necessarily the exact same ruling as Rule 21, but something similar, I think, is going to be spread out. And then, the inverter manufacturers are preparing for this, and just for California alone, they're manufacturing to those requirements. So I don't see it as an issue moving forward, but I think it is something that, the Midwest states will eventually adapt.
Obviously, on the large-scale systems, primarily we install central inverters, large megawatt skid-mounted systems. There's been an increase in the installation of string-level inverters and what have you. Obviously, central inverters, as you may or may not know, already have grid controls. They already take care of power factor and ramp rates and ride through and what have you. They have the capacitance, right? They have that power capability. Now with the advent of UL 1741 SA, which is part of that as well, or part of the California mandate, that just got mandated a few days ago, I guess, right? So the SA basically brings that central inverter, or at least a lot of that central inverter control, into string level inverters now. And those string level inverters are now going to be, capable of some of that. Of course, they can't handle the ride-through events maybe as much as a central could, but maybe when you combine and stack those, you can. So it is certainly beneficial. It's proven to be beneficial to the utilities and grid stabilization, reliability, as that clean power, or even filtering, if you will, those electrons that go through that you're matching to make the power be better as it gets into the grid through the substations or what have you.
You both kind of talked about labor and just making sure everybody is trained and then kind of retained for these projects, but is there anything else we can do to improve the installation process on utility scale projects?
Labor and education of the labor, education for the utilities, specifically in our area in the Midwest. A lot of utilities are new to solar, and so you're kind of holding their hand through their first pilot projects and educating them on the whole process, everything that's happening. They're used to coal plants or nuclear plants or gas turbines, and so this is a whole different realm for them, but it's much simpler of an installation and much easier and quicker to put up a solar system as opposed to some of these other power generation forms that they're using.
Yeah, again, it still is labor when it comes to the work out there, educating the utility customers and what have you on that. It's once again, it goes back to a sustainable workforce and continuing that cause. So yeah.
So what's trending with utility projects? Are they getting bigger? Are they getting smaller? I know you said doing more grid stabilization. What's trending? What's happening this year with utility projects?
I would say in the beginning, or several years ago, it was community-sized solar systems, 1 megawatts, 5 megawatts, 3 megawatts. We're seeing a lot more 30 megawatt size systems, 20 to 30 megawatt size systems in our regions. But what we're seeing with the utility and the large-scale systems actually now are a lot less, but a lot bigger. We're bidding on 400 megawatt size systems. 300. So they're getting bigger, but there's not very many of them. Of course, the problem there is with the amount of projects that there are, everybody's flocking to these bids, so they become very competitive. But that's the biggest trend, at least, that we're seeing in our sector.
Yeah, I agree with Matthew. I mean, we're seeing, like I mentioned, the Midwest kind of getting out of the whole pilot stage of solar projects. And so we're starting to see, 20 plus megawatt projects throughout the Midwest, where before it was, 3 to 10 megawatt projects. So we're starting to see bigger projects and less of them also. And more utilities that are interested in it. I mean, a lot of utilities within the Midwest that had no interest in solar are really showing a lot of interest now, whether it's to own the assets themselves or to put into some sort of program out there just to get the clean renewable energy.
Yeah, and I think it's the ratepayers too. We've done a few projects at some cooperatives in the United States, Midwest, and what we've seen too are the ratepayers are demanding, or if not anything, voting throughout their cooperatives to put renewables on their systems. One of the problems you have in the cooperative industry or sector, if you will, or these organizations, is that the leadership of those organizations are getting close to retirement age. And I've been to a few conferences, utility cooperative conferences, and I'll meet with some of these leaders and say, "What do you think about solar?" And they'll say, "Don't do it." Well, what's happening right now, and I'm talking, there's around 3,500 cooperatives in the United States. That's 3,500 potential customers with their own substations, maybe not all generating power, but certainly they've got something that solar could provide a benefit for them. But as they retire, the cooperatives are having a struggle in finding leadership to replace them. The children that have grown up, went to college, they don't want to go back to rural America. They want to stay in the cities and what have you. So they're struggling to find that leadership. But as that leadership comes, and I think probably within the next 3-5 years, when the attrition happens and the younger, more aggressive, renewable, supportive folks come in, I think it'll grow. But right now, it is a struggle, educating and letting them know and moving it forward.
Yeah, I'd like to add that some of the public utilities also are similarly seeing, their stockholders who are interested in renewable energy, and so they're really pushing them from that angle.
I'll ask one more question, then we'll open it up to questions from the audience if you guys have any. What do your companies do to advocate for pro-solar policy? Since you're in so many markets, how do you get involved with making sure that we get more solar out there?
Sure. Well, we've got a big social media presence so we're always pushing, policy information and as much information as we can about the solar industry throughout the social media network that we do have. Aside from that, we have at Inovateus what we call an evangelistic effort, and so we go out and just educate people about solar, whether it's schools or higher education, municipalities, utilities, a lot of C&I customers. We're out there just kind of trying to get them up to speed on the solar industry, where it's at now and what's possible.
And we're doing similar efforts, being members of organizations like SEIA and different various solar organizations, if you will. Some of my fellow colleagues in the executive team are members of boards of several organizations to help not only support those organizations, but also to provide guidance and find ways that we can help them promote solar, if you will. And of course, there's the normal grassroots things that we all should be doing, right? I write letters to my representatives in the states, and you just got to be active in supporting solar in that way. It doesn't take long, but it creates a unifying voice that can help us all as an industry.
Okay, well, thank you guys. Are there any questions for our utility scale, large scale installers up here?
Okay, yeah, thank you. My name is Jim Desjardins. I work for a smaller solar installer called Soluna Solar. We're in New Mexico. My question actually is for Nathan, because I lived a lot of my life in Chicago, and I periodically look back at what Illinois is doing, and they are got to be at the bottom of the heap in terms of installed PV. So I was interested in your comments on that, and then to piggyback off that specifically about ComEd, one of my favorite utilities.
Sure. Well, Illinois has been a market that we've been talking about for years in the solar industry that Illinois is going to hit, and it's going to be a great place for solar, and it's starting to get to that point now with their new programs in place. And so, right now it's more geared towards community solar for this kind of first round that they're going through. But after that, you're going to start to see more and more solar, larger scale solar projects. The utilities, for the most part, are going to be, I think, installing a lot of their own solar, so they'll be doing, large scale projects that they own themselves, outright. Community solar in Illinois, yeah. So that it's a big trend right now is community solar, and specifically, in the Chicago area, they're working on a lot of community solar projects. Yeah.
Kind of to go off that, do you guys think that renewable portfolio standards are still driving projects in the Midwest if they have those standards? Or, because I'm from Ohio, and I think our RPS we don't have it anymore. Right. So, we don't have a lot of solar, but our RPS is still driving solar? Yeah,
I think RPSs are still driving solar. Indiana doesn't have one either. It's a voluntary program, and so we've had some utilities step up, like Indianapolis Power and Light, and they put out 200 megawatt RFP, 5+ years ago. But you're starting to see other small pockets of utilities that want to do solar for their own reasons. But I think renewable portfolio standards are really driving it. It's part of what's driving Illinois also.
Any other questions? Markets for what? Yeah, what are the small pockets?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot more in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, even small areas in Indiana that kind of pop up, and same with Ohio. You'll see some small, RFPs pop up here and there. Wisconsin, we're starting to see stuff, and actually just today I was talking to a group about some projects in Iowa, which Iowa really hasn't been on our radar, and really hasn't done too much in the solar industry.
Yeah, and we just broke ground on a project last week in Connecticut, so they're kind of just bouncing around everywhere, in same regions you're talking about, though.
Any other questions?
So I live in Albuquerque, and we recently, the city council in Albuquerque recently voted to go 25% solar by 2025. And then I was interested to read shortly after that a number of other cities, including Madison, Wisconsin, voted to go 100% RE by I forget what date. And so then I kind of went back to the city, okay, you got to up your game. But could you comment a little bit about what's going on there and driving that?
Yeah, I think, in some of the more progressive cities or kind of college towns, you're starting to see it either come from the colleges who have a big presence in those communities, or just the municipalities, the cities that they're within. And so, yeah, you're seeing that throughout the U.S., mostly on the West Coast, where these, cities are making commitments to go 100% renewable, 50%, 75%. You haven't seen that much in the Midwest. But I think you will start to see it from other small college towns throughout the Midwest. I think you're not going to see it too much in Indiana, but Michigan, I think there's going to be some more areas. I think Grand Rapids recently made an announcement that they've got a higher renewable portfolio standard. Yeah. Right.
I'm a small commercial installer. Do you see any opportunities for someone like me with a big license but a small company, 9 of us, to work to take part in some part of utility scale installations?
There are opportunities for sure. The biggest thing, or the concern, if you will, even from us, when we have to qualify for a project, we have to qualify by sharing, financials and what have you. So anytime we have a smaller contractor involved, and we do sometimes on a substation, for example, we may have a small contractor do that because that's a specialized kind of work. It really boils down to capability and the making sure that they're qualified through the financials and what have you. But yeah, there's definitely opportunity for smaller contractors to be involved. Not of course, we're talking about aspects of the scope. We're not going to parse out half of a module installation to one contractor and half to another, because it just doesn't make sense. But yeah, there certainly is opportunity.
Question?
Hi there. My name is Bobby Howard. I'm a developer for Invenergy. We have several utility scale projects in development across the Midwest right now. And so, Matthew, I think this is a question for you. A lot of the landowners we're dealing with are, third, fourth, sometimes fifth generation farmers. And while the economics of our solar lease, it's almost a no-brainer, they have an emotional attachment to the land. And their question is often, you tell me at decommissioning, the land's going to be returned to its current, production level and quality. What, if any, consideration in construction are you giving towards, 25, 30 years down the road, that land is as good as it is today?
It's a good question. I remember Son Edison walking around Texas knocking on doors with guns pointed at him. I don't want solar. It was an interesting time. We were handing out land options like candy. It was basically, here, buy a new truck and don't talk to anybody. It was an interesting time. But getting back to your question, that is a concern if you're talking about a lease, right? Is what you're talking about, a lease type situation. Some solutions that one might have, and this happens on utility scale projects, even for a utility, if they own land, is sometimes you have to put forth a bond that basically covers the anticipated cost at the end of life, in the end of the use of the system. A lot of times, at least nowadays, sure, our industry in the beginnings, we got away with just saying, oh yeah, we'll fix it, it'll be back to normal without posting a bond. But nowadays, they're going to want something, to be able to move or put that land back in the condition beforehand. We're actually doing some, as we all know, I've been in the industry now 17 years, but we're getting to a point now where some of the systems, that were built even before I entered the industry, they're gonna need to be decommissioned soon. And we're starting to do some studies to find out, what's the cost, what can we do what service can we offer to decommission the systems? We have the equipment that drives the posts in the ground, we have the equipment to install it. Well, that same equipment can grab that equipment or those infrastructures, especially substructure components, and pull them back out of the ground and get it back to normal. So that is definitely a big concern that we have to address as an industry, end of life. And it is a big opportunity for a company that wants to get into it. And then of course you get into recycling. These are modules, they have, potentially hazardous, materials in them. How do you get rid of them? Can you recycle them? Can you rejuvenate them? There's actually a study in, I think, Italy right now where some researcher has found a way to delaminate the modules and put 10% back in, basically, of its efficiency, and then close it back up. Promising, but once again, we have to find a way, definitely, to do it. So does that answer your question?
I'm not sure how to really put this, but I was wondering about when you're working with utilities, having you sitting right next to them as they're doing their designs, their studies, how that helps with the permitting, how that helps with their education on smaller, say, commercial or industrial jobs, kind of trickling down from your level down to where I'm at. Commercial and industrial, and infrastructure upgrades, because it seems like every time we go to do like a full Caesar, every time we're doing studies for Caesars, they come back and they want all these astronomical upgrades, and I'm wondering like what you see in the future as far as infrastructure and the permitting that goes along with that. Like I said.
Okay. Of course they want upgrades. a lot of times the infrastructure is old, right? You have switchboards and main switchgear that's become antiquated that needs to get replaced and upgraded and what have you. A lot of times, at least with the utility, going back to the very first part of your question with the utilities and getting through permitting, more often than not, the utilities, even though they are, in a municipality, they have local AHJs and that kind of thing. The utility still falls under the National Electrical Safety Code, NESC. So a lot of times we're able to even get away from at least the local AHJ's permitting by having the high enough fence, the protections, the signs. Basically, this is a utility infrastructure. No unqualified person should be going in there. On the same note, an unqualified inspector shouldn't be going in there because he wouldn't inspect a nuclear power plant. He doesn't know what he's looking at. So we follow the NASC code when it comes to that. But then when it comes to sitting alongside the utility, we get that support, if you will. So that kind of, does that answer your question?
Hi, Brad Beyer from Energis High Voltage Resources. We're a Midwest commissioning, maintenance, and testing company, and we've been doing a lot of work on renewables, but mostly with the wind farm work. And now that solar is getting more and more accepted and at larger scales, we're kind of wondering where we would fit in as far as the maintenance and the testing. We're just not as familiar with those type of sites as we are with wind. I'm sure those needs are still there, but just wondering where that might be.
Sure. For operation and maintenance, you're saying contracts? Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a pretty smooth transition into solar, and you're seeing a number of wind companies get into solar. But for the most part, unless you're using trackers, which occasionally we do in the Midwest, but for the most part they're fixed arrays, and so there's not too many moving parts or pieces, and so I would say the educational period or the time just to get caught up, it wouldn't take very long for somebody who's really familiar with renewable energy, familiar with wind.
Yeah, I mean, you're still dealing with power conversion systems, right? You're still doing that kind of work. You've probably heard of an organization here, MaxGen, who does that. You could fall right into something that's similar to that, right? You're going in. When it comes to commissioning, the biggest thing for us is factory training on inverters to be that, get that certification, go to ATI or Nextracker and get their certification to be able to do maintenance or what have you on their systems, if that's something that that's available, if you will. But you could definitely morph right into it. Now, keep in mind, a tracker, yeah, there's moving parts. There's a few moving parts. They break and fail, but inverters go down a lot. Inverters is kind of the biggest crutch in these PV systems, and if you know how to service them and get into one or and maintain them or operate, and just deal with that or get into the monitoring system and go out and do that service work. Our biggest problem, at least when it comes to O&M on systems, and maybe this is a niche that you might be able to fill that someone else otherwise couldn't, is having licensed electricians going into those sites and doing that maintenance work in these new states and new regions, and that could put you ahead of your competition, because a lot of the times these folks have to sub it out. So right, you've got that markup of that other contractor, and so they can't compete. But then on the other hand, we may not have a choice because there's no one else available. So there's a lot of opportunity, definitely.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay. I want to thank Mathew Ricci and Nathan Vogel for joining us today, and please give them a round of applause.